We Nikon users have a real problem. It's not for lack of options. I mean, there's plenty of choice in terms of cameras and lenses, optics of all kinds really, from binoculars to medical imaging devices. I've been relying on those too heavily recently. As far as cameras, there's still great DSLRs, though arguably those are less important in the mirrorless era. But that doesn't mean cameras like the Z6 and Z850 are any less capable today than when they arrived. Nonetheless, we now have 11 mirrorless cameras to choose from, 8 full-frame DX and 3 crop sensor APS-C or DX, and there's now 48 Z-mount lenses to choose from, including those original f1.8s, some of the finest in their class, maybe even a class of their own, and the extraordinary f1.2s, 50, 85, and the recently released 35. It'll be 8 years this autumn since the Z system debuted. I bought in with 2 of the original Z6s, and aside from some minor teething troubles, the system has flourished despite prophecies of doom, which I'll get to in a moment. And I'm gonna keep this short. Hi, Ray here. Yes, Nikon, we have a problem with hostile forces. I'm not going to re-litigate the prophets of doom who claimed Nikon was on its deathbed. I covered that at the time, 4 years back. The Z9, released in late 2021, sidelined those predictions once and for all. The Z9, 3.5 years later, it still stands at the summit of mirrorless camera innovation for both photo and video production. There are, I'd argue, minor differences in functions, but there's little to adjudicate among the main contenders today. Sony has the A1 II, a global shutter camera in the A9 III. Canon has the sport-oriented R1. If you prefer APS-C, certainly Fuji has you covered, the most to choose from there. But the Z9, first real camera to ditch the mechanical shutter and go all in on electronics, still, to my mind, edges the competition. Yep, the Z9 tops out at 25 frames per second, shooting RAW, and if you rely on faster bursts to get the perfect wing position of a diving kingfisher, then maybe a problem for you. And maybe you need a different camera. I wouldn't argue, except maybe to wonder how wildlife photographers survived without 40 frames per second for so long. But my use case is probably different. And I'm not saying there isn't a use case somewhere for 120 frames per second RAW. But the Z9 brought amazing in-camera video specs as well. And I'm not about to, as I inferred, go down that rabbit hole. Nikon's biggest problem since the Z system arrived, a bit late, to the mirrorless revolution, has been the droves of anti-Nikon agitators on social media generally and here on YouTube. That's what I'm getting at. And I don't think it's Nikon's job to try to counter the haters. The best way they can push back is just continue to make industry-leading cameras and lenses. Like the Z9, Z8, and how about that ZF? Sells like hotcakes, I'm told. No one else has anything quite like it. Now, everyone is entitled to their opinion. I have a caveat though. A lot of fact-free opinions were invented back in the Nikon is dead phase of this campaign. Then there was Sam Newton's potato joke. I welcomed it at the time. It was pretty funny. I do have a sense of humor. But a lot of ideologues were dead serious, and I think it became something like an agitprop for humorless Nikon haters. How well do you think it aged? For viewers new to my channel, I've been a Nikon user for 45 years, with 35mm at least, aside from a brief experiment with Nikon's APS-C format. Not that cameras like the D7000 were bad. I made some of my most successful videos with one, and 1,000 decent photos or more. I should make clear, I've used many different brands and formats up to 11 by 14 inches. Yeah. And Nikon cameras and lenses contributed to a good portion of my earnings over those decades, from film to digital. So I don't need to defend that, certainly not here. And I'm going to get to the main point right after I touch on AI, because it actually inspired this rant, I suspect. Like any technology, it can be used responsibly or to create havoc. No, I'm not going to discuss the threat to traditional photography posed by generative AI. Not right now, anyway. There's a ton of content on that. But what we've seen recently, I suspect, is the use of AI, Grok, Chat, GPT, whatever, as a tool to win arguments. Not just purely as a research tool, but as a weapon of tribal warfare. I mean, in the case of photo view, someone assembles a list of technical comparisons between cameras. It's easy to do with AI, right? Tease out minor differences rated in favor of a favored brand to drop their gotcha type post across multiple platforms. I've seen almost identical diatribes on Facebook, and recently one turned up in comments on one of my videos. Your camera has less dynamic range than X camera, and so on. It reeks of AI-generated FUD. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying Nikon products are above criticism. Every camera manufacturer wants to improve their stuff and learns from mistakes, ideally. And photographers welcome improvements, obviously. Are Nikon cameras the only ones that can be improved? Look, I should do the same, using AI or more laborious research. I've been doing it for years. Compile a list of functions where Nikon cameras outperform, say, Sony cameras. And I'm only mentioning that brand because inevitably, almost always, that's what these people do. And I report this not as a beef with Sony, because for all I know, the people who go to the trouble of assembling these posts are just regular ship disturbers with nothing better to do. I hope that's all it is. I also want to make it clear that legitimate criticisms of Nikon products in terms of design or function are welcome. I've made them myself right here. But nitpicking or tribal aggression, no, not here. This is my channel, admittedly Nikon-centric because I primarily use Nikon for the aforementioned reasons. No professional switches brands, willy-nilly. Not when they're heavily invested in a system, and that's been my case, as I say, for 45 years. So I'll delete with extreme prejudice any attempt to play those kinds of silly games here. Nitwits, go play them somewhere else. Comments here are reserved for fair play, constructive debate, and legitimate corrections if I make mistakes. I'm human, and I don't know everything even after 4 decades in the business, and a lifelong fascination with photography besides. I don't pay attention to every new development and who leapfrogged the competition in a limited area this month, or they're promising to do so next month. So let's be reasonable and happy with all the options that we have today. Sometimes I think too many. Make stuff. Share your creativity. Be grateful. Okay, that's my rant for the day. Feel free to contribute civilly in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. And do consider subscribing if you're new to this Nikon appreciative channel. In the meantime, take care, cheers. I hope to see you later.